I'm happy you were able to join us today. You're welcome. Thank you. Like I was saying earlier on, you were when you said Dr. Pauline Long honored you, you told just a little bit about your story, how you started. Can you please introduce yourself a bit and then let us know exactly?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Sema. Nice to speak to you.
Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Good morning.
Hi. So I've met Dr. Pauline Long about 4 years ago, and after I wrote an autobiography about my childhood and how abusive it had been, and how it had impacted me and my siblings, and how not being able to talk about what we went through, how that impacted us mentally and physically. And Dr. Pauline Long heard me speak at an event, and then she invited me to speak on her TV show, and we have had this happen once a year, every year for the last 4 years, because it's abuse, domestic violence, domestic abuse and child abuse is such a taboo topic that nobody wants to speak about. And Pauline was really taken by the fact that I talk about it openly, because she was saying, does everybody in the white community speak about abuse, domestic violence openly like you do? And I said, no, they don't. But it has to change. And she said, well, in the Black Afro-Caribbean community, it's a definite taboo. Nobody will talk about it. So I would like you to come on and have an honest and open conversation about what abuse is, what it isn't, and how can we, as you said, stick up for ourselves. How, what are our rights as human beings to not be abused? So will you come on and just speak about all of this? And I said, yeah, sure, not a problem. I will speak to anybody and everybody about what abuse is, what it isn't, what healthy relationships are and what they are not, because we as human beings have a right to be loved, nurtured, and not to be abused. Full stop. Bottom line. And that's what I do. That's what I spend my days doing. Is helping people understand what situation they're in and to try and get them out of that situation if that's what they choose to do or what they want to do with their lives. So that's really in a nutshell what I do.
Okay, and then can I ask, if it's not personal, can you tell us a little bit about your background, your story?
Yep, sure.
How you came up with, and then what pushed you to start talking about this?
Yeah, so how long's a piece of string? So I'm going to just bullet point this and not go into the specifics because I don't want to traumatise anybody. And we have got an ongoing police case as well, so I have to be a bit careful about what I say. But my mum left home when I was 7, so I was a young 7-year-old child. And I lived with my dad and my stepmum for 4 years. And in that time, my dad was arrested and convicted of paedophilia, not against me. My stepmum, whilst my dad was in prison, abused us mentally, physically. She starved us. And this was 30 minutes down the road in Penge and Crystal Palace. This all took place. When I was 11, I went back to live with my mum, who had remarried my stepdad and had 2 more children. And my stepdad was an alcoholic and a very abusive man. My mum had been in 2 domestic violence relationships, and we'd grown up in all of that. So that impacted us as well. And then I was abused by someone outside of the family sexually. And then I was sexually assaulted within the family home as well. And one of my siblings has suffered or endured a lot of sexual abuse, which is now being looked at in the police case. So obviously I can't go into that. But the domestic violence that we suffered, not directly because it's my mum that was directly, but as children, we lived in fear 24/7, and then we went on to be mentally and physically, sexually abused and neglected. So there's a lot of trauma within the family dynamics, And I left home at 15, and for 15 years what I did was just try and put everything behind me and pretend it didn't happen. I just forged ahead and tried to make my life something worth living for me. So I become a chartered management accountant. I spent 9 years studying in the evenings at weekends whilst I worked during the day to pay my way, because there was no one paying my rent. I had to do that from the age of 15. So at the age of 28, I qualified, I got pregnant, had my first child, and that led to me having a slide in my mental health, because my brain couldn't compute.
That's another thing.
Yeah, massively. My brain couldn't compute how anyone could hurt a baby, a child, and that's when my past started coming back to haunt me. So at the age of 30, I had a breakdown at work in front of everybody, and that led me down the route of getting some kind of counselling and therapy. And then for the last, I'm 48 this year in a few weeks actually, for the last sort of like 17 years, I've been in recovery. I've been trying to find out how my past has actually impacted my current, in order to make changes so that I'm not always suffering from what happened in the past, which had nothing to do with me. I didn't instigate any of it, but and all victims and survivors of childhood abuse go through this to some extent. I didn't want to live like that anymore. I want to be free of all of this. I don't think I ever will be free of it because it's part of me, but I can change the way that I react to it, react to different situations, and make sure that nobody ever abuses me again. And that's where I got my strength from, really. The minute I decided that I was going to stand up for myself and not be a victim but be a survivor thriver and want something different from my life, and I found my voice and I was able to speak my truth and be my authentic self, that was the start of me regaining my power and my control.
Wow. Somehow you heard all that.
Yes,
like she rightfully said, she could freely talk about it. But you know, in Africa we cannot. I personally will tell you I was into that domestic violence, but I couldn't talk. I still can't talk about it. I don't know how you got the courage to come out in public to tell us just this small story. Because you know, when we growing up, mine wasn't as a child. I have to give it to her because it's so painful. You can imagine how I have a charity that deals with women and children in Nigeria, but I can't imagine a situation putting a child vulnerably into sexual abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse, and all that. And you know, this child cannot talk about it. Thank God she's able to do that now as an adult. Can you imagine what had gone through what she went through that period? And before I come back to her, you have a subject, marital rape. That marital rape, I think, it also relates to this, what she just talked about. Selma, please introduce yourself before we continue, because she has done her introduction. I didn't actually. I said a little bit about you when you were not on air, but please, can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Okay, hello again. My name is Shema.
Shema.
Yes, Shema. It's a native African name, so the T is silent, so it's called Shema.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm a lawyer by training. I've been a lawyer.
Hello.
We've lost you.
Hello, we lost you, but I'll try calling you back. I think it was from there. We lost Shema. If you're listening, just hold on, don't go anywhere. We lost her, but we'll get her back because it's becoming very interesting. What we are going through right now, that we never thought. What I'm hearing actually. Never thought people will go through it. Children go through so much, and it's very. I wouldn't say interesting, but it's scary. But hearing it from the voice of somebody that has gone through this.
Me?
Yes, Summer, you're back here. Can you hear us?
Yes, I am.
Okay, sorry, we
Yes,
lost
I
you a
can
minute,
hear
so
you.
you can continue now. We lost you a bit. You were just trying to introduce yourself. Can you please go ahead, Summer?
Yes. Yes, so I'm going to start again. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for 12 to 13 years now. And in the course of my legal career and profession, I developed a passion for representing and protecting women and children's rights. Women's rights, because I've worked with women at the grassroots a lot. And I've seen the kind of suffering they go through. And because in Africa, wives are more like franchise property. So a lot of men have no regard for their wives. And so over time, I had litigated matters protecting women's rights and doing a lot of court processes and empowering women and teaching them from the grassroots. Going further, I started working with an NGO called Global Rights as a program officer. And when I was program officer in Global Rights, I had worked on empowering and educating women at the grassroots, building capacity to make sure that women understand what their rights are and that their rights are enforced and protected, and creating a connection between the grassroots and people in government. So in working with government, I had worked with the special advisor to the Senate President on the Gender and Equal Opportunities Bill. I had worked on advocating for that bill so that women are empowered through the bill, because to be honest, in Nigeria and Africa, patriarchy is so entrenched that women are not regarded as anything other than franchise or property, and they are only meant to be wives. So a lot of women, even after they develop themselves and they have PhDs and they are successful in their careers, they still feel inadequate to an extent. And going further, I'd worked with Nigeria's entertainment industry as well, helping them, because Nigeria and Nollywood is a big deal. So we needed to see how we could create a connection in changing the narrative on how people perceive sexual violence in Nigeria. Sexual violence in Nigeria had become normal. Domestic violence is, you'd hear men say things like, if your wife doesn't behave, give her a slap. Things women had. There was just no regard, and Nollywood wasn't helping. You'd see shows of men beating their wives, raping their wives, and telling them, "You're my property, I paid your dowry." So we worked with Nollywood to change those narratives and to talk with producers, musicians, and actors, making them see that, look, there's so much power in your hands. We need to change the narrative surrounding sexual violence. It's not normal. Let's help people speak out. Let's help people report these crimes. Unfortunately, it was successful. I'm no longer with Global Rights. I'm now doing my own thing. I'm a consultant on sexual and gender-based violence. I try to speak. People like to call me a gender activist, but I'm trying not to be in a gender box. But, I'm really passionate about protecting women and children and ensuring their rights are ensured and enshrined, because in where I come from, within our African and Nigerian context especially, there's so much violence and women are disenfranchised, and that has to change. From my perspective.
Yeah, that's very well understood, because I'm from the same area too, and I know how hard it is for women to be heard. We're hardly heard when, like you said, when you don't listen to your husband, you can be beaten up. And especially in my own side, you cry, go back to your parents. They will tell you, no, go back to your husband because he's paid dowry. So there's nobody speaking to us. But coming back to Miss Chris, I was going to ask, when you were young going through this, was there a kind of help? Was there anybody that heard your voice and you were not able to speak out?
I'm smiling because we know how hard it is to speak up, whether you are black, Asian, white, whatever. It's hard to speak up as a child. You're very disempowered as a child. Went to school. I wrote a story and gave it to my teacher, and she basically said that I had an overactive imagination, so that silenced me. When I was sexually assaulted at the age of 9 by the person outside the family home, I went to the police, local police, and it was my word against the person. So it never went anywhere, even though what happened to me in that particular time period really sits with me today and affects me. Social services, so when my mum left home because of domestic violence, she was trying to get custody of us through the family court system in Bromley, and basically social services were involved with my family. We were on the at-risk register. Yeah. That's what it was called back then. We told them what was going on, and it was just children playing up, children telling lies, and it was just like, that silences you. In the end, when you speak up, you speak up, you speak up. My brother ran away from home via school, so he went to school but ran away, and the police took him back to school. My stepmum come and picked him up, and then he got punished when he come back home. So I don't know how many times children or women or even men that are abused have to speak up. How many times you have to tell your story and not be believed, and it has to change.
I can imagine, because as an adult you can decide on what to do, but like you said, your brother ran away and got back. I must say this nationally: social science is failing the children.
But I think the system is failing even the social workers, to be honest.
I have a situation, an example. I have a situation that a child was locked up for about 7 days, didn't go to school. 7 days as punishment from the father.
Right.
And then the social workers did nothing. The school didn't do nothing. All the school said it was oh, he's okay, he's his father. The child out of the place. There are situations where they don't have a mother that could quickly react like that, and then the child. And I read something about yesterday in the paper yesterday about a child, a 2 or 4 year old child that didn't come he didn't come to school, and I don't know if you saw it.
I didn't see that in yesterday's paper.
Okay, the mother, they have a kind of illness. I can't remember what it was, but the mother died 4 days, 7 days. The boy didn't come to school.
Wow.
Now they're saying they called, they didn't hear from the mother, but this boy, the mother died, and he held the mother and then died 4 days after from exhaustion.
Oh no.
From exhaustion and all starvation and exhaustion. This boy died until 7 days later. They brought to the house in the UK, in London.
Wow.
And then found out that the boy died 2 days before they came. All these things, when I read this, my heart broke.
Yeah.
Because this child could have been saved.
Yeah.
If somebody had, 2 days you didn't come to school, 3 days. Some boroughs, they will come after the mother to find out why is your child not. But this system did not. And I can imagine that time. We all grew up the same period. Growing up that time, nobody will believe you. Nobody believes in this domestic violence. Then child abuse. When you talk, they say, "Oh, you're seeking attention." That's what they will say. But I'm really, really happy. I don't know how to applaud you.
As you don't need to applaud me. Yeah.
To come up and tell this story. You've been telling this story. I went through your website and I realized you've been telling this story for a while now. And I'm glad people are actually coming up, listening, and then after some people listen to it and say, okay, why don't I try and come up and Sema, I hope in Nigeria one day somebody will pick up and say, okay, I've gone through this, let's talk about it publicly.
That's where we are going to in Nigeria right now. People are getting empowered through other people's stories. You know, when you hear a woman who has been through abuse and violence, and she's out there telling you, I've gone through this, you can go through this.
Oh, I never used to have this problem. We lost you again. Sema, we lost
She'll come back in a minute.
Okay. We'll have to find out what's going on in her internet there, because I've not had these problems before. But while I'm trying to connect her back, after this was in your early years, and then it was at the age of 18, was it when did you start?
15, I left home,
15? Okay. 15 you started talking about it.
not really talk, because I think at the age of 15 I decided that I didn't want to be carry the shame from the family through to my adult life. So I cut my childhood off in my brain and decided that I was going to make my own life, because at the end of the day, at the age of 15, you've got nothing, you've got nowhere to live, you've got no money, but I had freedom, and with that freedom I had all the opportunities. So I didn't know how to verbalise that at the time, but I can verbalise it now. But back then I thought it's better that I've got my freedom and I can go out and make my life my own, because there's 4 adults in my life that had made my life hell. My life couldn't be any worse. So just be brave and do what you need to do, and that's what I did. And every day there was a struggle, but
you were getting relief.
Yeah.
Wow. And then another thing I was going to ask was, we'll take out a bit, let's move from domestic violence. Mentally, how did it, mental health is one of the things they talk about a lot.
We have this conversation all the time, because there are victim survivors. I'm in contact with them every day, and everybody's impacted differently. There are commonalities, but there's different impact depending on when your abuse took place, what age you were when it took place, how many times you were abused, who you were abused by. If you were abused within the family, there's different connotations to if you was abused within a school. It's all bad, none of it's right, but it has different impact. And being labelled mentally unwell, or you've got a mental illness, is not right. It's not correct, because at the end of the day, what you are suffering from is trauma because of the abuse that you've suffered. That's not mental illness itself, but how it explained to me was survivors were coming forwards, victim survivors were coming forwards, and they needed support, they needed help. But on the mental health list, survivors of childhood abuse it was not listed, so it was not it was not allocated like a mental health code. So they had to create something, okay, in order to get you the help. Okay, so that's where that's come from. But a lot of victims and survivors do not want to be labelled with a mental health issue, because then it affects your chances of employment. It affects so many different things. There's so much taboo around mental health. There shouldn't be, but there is. And you know, when I had a breakdown at work at the age of 30, when I went to the doctor, we agreed that he would not put mental ill health on my records, because otherwise I would find employment at the level that I was at difficult. So we put stress, and back then even the word stress had negative connotations, but it was better than having this label of mental ill health. And at the end of the day, many victim survivors of domestic violence, childhood abuse, whatever it is, they haven't got a mental illness. Some have, and you know, it's not their fault, but it's the trauma, and trauma in itself has a whole different package of impact on mental and physical ill health, okay? And it doesn't always need to be medicated against. It needs someone to say, what you went through was wrong, I believe you, I don't judge you, now let's talk about how it's impacted you, and let's unpick what's going on for you. So it's more about not just talking about it, but it's more about having a holistic approach towards it, so that it's just, don't just, you know, pop this pill, you'll be all right, and be on that pill for, I don't know, 2 years, and then have ill effects from that. It's such a complex area to start unpicking, but one of the things that I'm saying about, you are affected mentally and physically because of the trauma you suffered, but it's not necessarily a mental illness.
And Selma, have you had people, sorry, we got you back, we lost you and we got you back.
Yes.
I don't know, is it your internet that is, what's cutting you off? Because we don't usually have people get caught up.
I'm sorry, it should be our internet. It should be the internet over here. I apologize for that.
That's
It's
okay.
the reception over here.
That's right. I was going to ask that side, have you had people approach you too on the same kind of issue? Like, do you think I don't think, let me not say I don't think, because like you said, it's trauma. Because I know you can be really, really traumatized when you have things like that, especially when your rights are taken by force. But then have you had people come to you and say, okay, this is what I went through, this is what happened, and, you know, like when it comes to relating to mental health?
Yes, there's a very, 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 very interesting illustration someone gave me, and I want to share it with you. And she talks about Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. That's what happens to a woman or a girl or a child when they...
Oh, no, we can't lose you now. We cannot lose you now. Let me get her again. We cannot lose you. I wonder what part of Nigeria she is. Abuja. We don't usually have this. But just bear with us. My listeners, my viewers, just bear with us. We're having some kind of internet problems in Nigeria. And I would let her go back to the Humpty Dumpty story because it's getting interesting. Hello, Sema.
I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, please take us back to that Humpty Dumpty. That's where you start, the Humpty Dumpty story. Take us back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, and the illustration given to me was Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. We all know Humpty Dumpty, but where would say Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again.
Yeah.
And that's a typical scenario with someone who experiences any form of violence, woman, girl, or child. You can go through all the therapy, go through all this, get all the psychosocial support you need. All they do is keep you going. But the trauma consistently and constantly lives with you. You are never really the same. You are in constant fear of looking over your shoulder, wondering who's the next person, what am I doing that is attracting violence to myself. And so that's why psychosocial support helps. Psychosocial support helps you realize that it's not about you. It's the person who perpetrated violence in that problem. All we have to do is help you heal and help you heal through this process and love yourself enough to understand that you didn't cause this to happen to you. And I experienced some sort of sexual violence as a child, and I can tell you for
She's gone quiet now.
Just bear with us, please. Just bear with us. We're getting there. Just bear with us. We'll get her back. And, okay, she's ringing. We'll get her back. Yes, Sema.
Hello?
Yes, you're back.
It's my network. Nigerian network can be really bad sometimes.
I can imagine, yeah. We're listening, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So it's the psychosocial support and all of that keep you going, but you do not completely heal. You do heal, but basically what you do is live through your trauma.
Yeah.
Over here, though, you live through your trauma. You accept, you own your truth, so to speak, and understand. And the most important thing for me, which is what I tell them, is understand that whatever happened had nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
The perpetrator of the violence against you is the person that has a problem, and the person committed a crime against you. What happened to you you are not flawed, you are not being seductive, you are not a bad person. If it is a woman experiencing domestic violence, you don't have a sharp mouth. There's a popular phrase here that says women who have sharp mouths, they provoke their husbands, and that's why they get beaten. It's not about any of that. So that's what we need to help these women and girls and children heal. That it had absolutely nothing to do with them, and just help them live through those pieces. But you never ever really come back together. I can say that because I've suffered sexual violence as a child, and I know that I still am traumatized by thoughts of that incident. And a lot of time, I was between 6 and 8, I still blame myself, and I ask myself, did I want it? Did I ask for it? Did I call for it? You know, those are the things that we live through.
Okay. And still on your story, in this case, I was also going to ask, and then, like you said, there's still police case pending. We can't go further into that. Maybe we should take it back a bit to the places that I know we have in UK now. I know we have like places you can go to, and people can listen to you, like with domestic violence cases and abuse. Then they didn't have them.
I think they didn't really have women's refugees back then where my mum could go.
Yeah.
So when my mum left when I was 7 in 9.
Did you ever discussing with your mom, like you and your mom? Did you especially when the abuse was going on? Did you sit down and discuss it with your mom, or what was her reaction?
No, my mum died last June, so we sort of like we weren't on great terms because of this ongoing police case.
Okay.
But because my mum had gone through 2 domestic violence relationships, she would not admit that she was, especially in the second one, in the domestic violence relationship. She admitted she was in the first one because she left, and when I tried to get her to leave the second one because it was the same thing, it was even worse from where we were standing. No, he loves me. We have a brilliant marriage. When he was beating you or playing up or whatever he was doing, that's just him. No, Mum. So yes, we did have these conversations, but she blanked me a lot of the time, and it was very hard to have these conversations. And when I did have them with her, especially in the last sort of like 5 years, my mum admitted that she knew that the abuse was going on, and to be very truthful, my mum was actually abusive to some of my siblings as well. She wasn't abusive to me, but she was abusive to some of my siblings. So my mum was part of the problem as well. Yeah. But to unpick all of that, there are some women, my mum being one of them, that may feel that if they're not part of the abuse, then they will be abused themselves. Yeah. So a very complicated area, and one that I haven't got all the answers to. But for me, I have children, and if anyone abused my children, there would be a different story. I wouldn't be in the relationship, but this is me. I know there are lots of women that are in these relationships and they can't leave for whatever reason, and my mum was one of them. I'm not in her shoes, so I can't say what my script would be if I was in her shoes. But I just know that because I grew up in those environments and I saw and felt the impact, that I personally wouldn't allow anyone to abuse myself or my children. I would do something to change the situation, but that's me.
Yeah, my situation, like I told you, I didn't call it abuse then. I don't know what I called it then, but I was actually both physically and mentally abused also. But I had a reason for staying. My reason then being material things. So even when I had opportunities to leave, I was like, okay, we already established a beautiful home. We have this, we have that. Will I leave this for another woman? That was my mental state then. And I stayed and I took all the abuse. Then it was after I left, I then sat down and said, did I actually stay? I could have been killed, you know? And really, I could have been killed. Because I went through terrible physical abuse. And I didn't, it wasn't here, it was in America, it was in New York. And I couldn't even seek help. I didn't want to seek help. I didn't find it as an abuse. Even when as I was about 8 months pregnant, I was pushed down the stairs.
Wow.
I still didn't take it as an abuse. I just said, okay, well, he lost me. Because he will,
Wow.
it will happen, and then he will come back. Oh, mommy, I'm very, very sorry. I didn't know what I did. I didn't know, I love you so much. And then he will flourish, he will buy me all these gifts, diamonds and flowers and all that. And I stayed. And then maybe in the next 1 month, 2 months, it will happen again. So I went through that, but I see where your mom was coming from. I didn't call it an abuse then. It was after years after that, after I left that I then realized, that's actually what it was. I almost got killed. But I'm glad I left and moved on. But seriously, this is the first time I'm ever talking about it. The first time I'm talking about it, and I'm telling you, it was your story that made me able to
brave enough.
Yes, brave enough to talk about it. I'm sure if he's listening, I'm sure he would say, wow, was she able to go outside and talk about it, But that is the mental, that is coming from the mother's point of view. And I can imagine what the child will be going through if you talk to your mother and she's not listening, she's not seeing it. And sometimes you will get her to the verge of, okay, she's about to lose her life and you can't stop her. I can imagine what the child is going through.
When you see your mum being beaten,
yes,
or threatened to an extent where you are literally quivering in your socks, you're shaking, you are crying, you're shaking, you're screaming, leave her alone, don't hurt her. That, I just don't understand why that's not a wake-up call for some women to sort of go, oh my goodness, you might have got away with abusing me, but look at the impact on my children. You're not doing that. But this is the nature of the beast, of this coercive control, of this power that some men have over some women, that they can't see a way out. They are so entrenched in what is being dished out to them, not because they want it, but just because of the dynamics of the situation, that they just cannot see a way out of the situation, and they stay and take. Because someone said to me, it's almost like it's better the devil you know than the devil you don't. So how do I know? There's safety for some women in knowing this particular abuser. If they go out into the wider world, how is it gonna be any different? Maybe the abuser out there that they're gonna meet next is gonna be even worse. Yeah. So I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a counsellor, I don't understand the dynamics, but I am open to understanding that there are lots of factors that keep some women in these relationships. But I also do know that when I hear that women that have left these relationships that are so destructive, so abusive, that the first thing they say is, I can breathe, I can be my own person.
That's the word.
I now realise that what I was going through was abuse, was violence, and they can recognise it for what it is, but when they're in the situation they just can't.
They don't even see it.
Well, you just said that.
Yes, go ahead.
What Chris said.
Yes.
It's interesting. What I've noticed, the pattern with abusers is the first thing they do is shatter the woman's self-esteem. They make you feel like nobody deserves you, nobody can have you, nobody will want you. And it now makes it look like they are doing you a favor. The abuser is doing the woman or whoever the victim is a favor by being in the relationship with such a person. So that's even, if you are someone who had self-confidence issues in the beginning, marriage or relationship with such a person only makes it worse. You can't see yourself being out of that. Nobody will want me. I'm broken. I'm shattered. Since he broke me, he might as well have me. So what we do, where I come from, what I do with in my line of work is the first thing I tell a woman is she's enough. I've felt that way. I've experienced the kind of abuse that makes a woman wonder, I deserve this. It's me. It's my fault I'm getting hit. It's my fault this man treats me this way. He has said it. If I didn't offend him so much, if I didn't get him mad enough all the time, he wouldn't hit me, because that is what they say. So the thing is, we tell women, you are enough. You are beautiful, you are brave, you are smart, you are intelligent, you are capable of doing anything. If a woman is empowered enough to know that without a man, a man is not a crutch, a man is not a pillar, she can fly, she will fly, and she will fly free. Another thing that keeps women in abusive relationships that I've learned is, where do I go from here? What will people say? Where I come from here in Nigeria, it's what will people say? People will call me a divorcee. People will say I broke the home, and I'm raising my children in a broken home. But a friend said something profound to me, and he said, and I hope he's listening. He said there's no such thing as a broken home. That's what he says to women, and that children are only as whole as their parents make them. So if a woman can understand that, if I walk away from this abusive relationship, I'm not going to give my children any kind of toxicity. My children aren't going to be broken. I define what is whole to my children. I define what is whole to myself. I am not broken, I am whole. A toxic relationship is not good for my children. That in itself is a broken home. So that is what I think where we need to go, especially here within the Nigerian and African context, is empower women enough to understand that they are not breaking their children by staying away. Because what Chris said is so true. Some women, it's a wake-up call for them when they see the children saying, stop hitting her, don't hit her. But for other women, what they don't understand is, if they don't walk away from those relationships, their children will perceive it as normal. The boys will grow up thinking, I need to hit a woman, or I need to hit my wife, or whoever I'm in a relationship, my significant other, to let her know I love her. And a girl will think, if he doesn't hit me, he doesn't love me. Mom went through it. So the dynamics are scary sometimes, but we need to address it. And I think the first point in addressing it is empowering women, empowering their minds, empowering them financially, spiritually, emotionally, and physically too.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, ladies, we're getting to close to the second half of the hour, and it's nearly 10 minutes to 12. We'll take a little break, but before we do that, let me do some shout out to our friends on Facebook. Chigozie, thank you. Francis Owade, thank you for tuning in. Beto Pitanzo, thank you for tuning in. Elesitin Njikonye, thank you for tuning in. Lucia Estelle, Elizabeth Shingle, Ephobia Bonna, thank you for tuning in. Godfrey Shegwe, thank you for tuning in, sir. Honorable Godfrey Shegwe. Ewa Pezik, Bishop Chi, John Oshie from America. I'm glad all you tuned in. I hope we're able to get a little point across, especially when it comes to domestic violence. It's not only women that face this domestic violence, men also do. And but today, yes, we're treating on how we women were able to take it, and especially relating to our children, what we are doing. In the next hour, we'll talk about if there are helps out there, if there's somehow how we can further empower the women. Miss Chris, like we know, she's an author. I know about one of her books, which is Through the Eye of a Child. I love this. I read through it a little bit the first and second page, but I haven't gone through it. I didn't know about the second one, Breaking the Cycle. We will talk about these books, and then for her to be able to tell us the stories and then put it in writing also. And we'll also talk about the NGOs that help people, empower these people, and how we can benefit or support these NGOs in the next hour. Let me play some music. We'll listen to our adverts. Remember, you're still on UJR Talk Radio. You can advertise through my show, Straight Talk Msteeq Marlene. You can sponsor the show. We talk about politics and current affairs. If there's any topic you want us to take up, you can also mention it. We'll take it up. But meanwhile, we are still, Miss Chris, thank God, is still with us in the studio. And Sema, you're still on the phone. I hope you don't go off. We have, let's just take a little break, and then we'll come back, okay? You all right now?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I hang up?
Okay, hang up. I'll take you off back. I'll call you back. Okay.
Okay.
And just I'll call you back at 10 past the hour. That's
okay.
That's all right.
All right then.
At home, at work, in your car. New Urban Jazz.